the moon on a rocket ship high in the air. Yes, I'd like to visit the moon, but I don't think I'd like to live there. Though I'd like to look down at the earth from above, I would miss all the places and people I love. So although I may go, I'll be coming home soon. 'Cause I don't want to live on the moon. No, I don't want to live on the moon.
All right. Thank you so much, Gina, for opening our show. If you didn't recognize that song, for those of you who grew up with the show Sesame Street, that was a hit from that children's program. And we wanted to pick that for two reasons. One, Sesame Street has figured out how to engage probably the hardest audience virtually for years and years and years. And we also, at the Internal Comms Pro Collective, we always push for people to shoot for the moon, because as the saying goes, you'll catch a star. But Gina, I love that we can showcase your full self here on the show today. Thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for having me. I was a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie, but thank you guys so much for listening.
All right, well, we're going to keep things moving and rocking and rolling. We got wonderful feedback from our audience last time. I got to admit, and I'm going to be vulnerable here, we were so worried about the production value and ending on time. I forgot the most important thing. Our audience, they had questions for Calvin and Nicolina. And I'm like, oh no, like the learning process sometimes just sucks. So today we want to get more quickly into introducing our very special guest, because we have wonderful questions that the audience has pre-submitted. Some people are coming and going to ask their questions live. But right now we want to bring on the show Tiara Conley. Let's bring on Tiara. Gina, if you wouldn't mind. Tiara is the digital channels specialist for VMware, which is located way out on the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area. Tiara, you made it. You're here.
I did. Thanks so much for having me.
Tiara, tell us a little bit about you and your backstory, what you do at VMware, just so we can kind of orient our audience.
Sure. So at VMware, I actually work on the global communications team, but I myself do not have a background in communications. So my background comes in just general business administration. And once I joined VMware, which was about 2.5 years ago, I was able to join this amazing team that's working on our digital channels. So we're really a support function of communications when you think about it that way. And we work a lot with our IT teams and a lot with developers and other teams like marketing. We branch out to a lot of different areas of the business, but we really work on enabling our communicators to do what they do best, which is communicate. And we do that by building out the digital channels that we serve up those communications on.
Well, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show. So Tiara was a guest on our podcast. Part 2 of your series just hit the airwaves last week. You and your teammate Anthea are both featured. If you haven't caught that series, it is called The Formula for Innovation, A New IC Vision. And I'm telling you, both of you ladies were one of the most innovative people, probably because of your background has not been in internal comms. And so you bring kind of the interesting, fresh perspective. VMware is so innovative. I know that you and your team are really striving to provide this superior audience experience. And you give lots of tips on how you did that, how you socialized a vision, all on throughout the series. But you said something that caught my eye, and that when I asked you the question, hey, if you could go back to, the first day on the job at VMware and warn yourself and tell yourself something, you said in the podcast, and I wrote this down because I said, we got to talk about this backstage. You said, I wish I would have known how to do better testing and better documentation. And it was a fleeting moment. You'll hear it on the podcast, but today I want to get into that because so many people in our audience are innovators and they want to test things and they want to pilot stuff. And I thought you getting on the show today and sharing your process would be of so much value. So you want to dive into it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really eager to.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start sharing our screen again because you've got a few slides I know that that we've prepared. So let's hop back
Hmm.
in and explain what UAT is give us some language and a definition of what we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So a lot of times when you do testing, this is after you've come to your product development team with your big idea, whether it's a new channel you want to create or maybe just some new functionality. Then there's always going to be some phases of testing. What you'll usually hear is QA and UAT. So there's quality assurance, which is just making sure that whatever's been developed actually works from a technical perspective. And then there's user acceptance testing, which is making sure that it meets the demands that the business side had. So whenever you request something be created, then you always have a list of the requirements that need to be in place to make sure that it works and that it's accepted on the business side. So that's essentially what user acceptance testing is, making sure that all of those various requirements are set in place as expected from the end user.
And if I'm sitting in the audience today, I can use this if I'm testing a new tool, a new project, a new initiative. Can this generically be expanded over different types of pilots, or is this specifically towards a product?
So you usually see this with a product, not to say that it can't be expanded to other areas as well, but when you think about user acceptance testing, it's usually making sure that if you're kind of developing something, I mean, you can do it in various scenarios as well, whether it's a communications plan too, you can do it then, but just making sure that if you start with a beginning goal, then that goal is well received by the end user. So that could be an audience that you're communicating to as well. That could be part of user acceptance testing.
Okay. All right. So let's get into your information that you've provided. Talk about this slide with our audience.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about UAT, there's usually these 4 general objectives. That's making sure, as I was mentioning, that per the business requirements. So the various things that need to be in place, the features that need to be in place to make sure that what you're building out actually meets your needs. So it's to make sure that the product actually, or the system actually meets those needs. The second is that when you think about the people who are actually going to be using this, so in my case, when I build out digital channels, it's the communicators usually who are the end users of those platforms. So I look and see, do my communicators agree that this meets their needs? So the needs of the business and the needs of the actual individual users. The third is, of course, there's a lot of regulation especially when you're working in larger companies, even smaller ones as well, to meet regulation and legal requirements. So if there's any conversation that you've had with your legal teams, just making sure that it checks their boxes as well in terms of being compliant. And then the last one is, the overall goal of this is to get whatever product or system that you've built out into the state of production. And production is essentially just another way of saying that it's live, that it's launched and ready for use by the general audience that it's intended for.
Okay. And if our audience has got questions, again, put them in the chat, raise your hand, we'll call on you. Before we move on, I want to talk about this business requirements. If I'm an internal communicator, do you have tips on how do I find out what meets the requirement? Who am I meeting with? Can you dive a little bit into when you were creating your superior audience experience? And I remember Anthea specifically saying that their employees were used to these amazing consumer experiences. So that pushed you guys, down the road. How do you find out the business requirements and the end user? What does that look like? Or are we going to get into that on the next slide?
Actually, it might be good to tackle that here, really.
Okay.
But there's several different ways to do this. But what's kind of a great approach is when you actually go out and ask, what do people want? Because a lot of times we make assumptions based on what we think that the end users want, but sometimes it's not the case. And especially if you think about end users being your employees, then you definitely want to make sure that, you know, you don't assume things about them. So what people will usually do is they'll do user persona mapping, which is where you'll go and you'll actually survey people, your actual audience members, to see what their current experiences and where some of their pain points are. So you can walk them through a specific scenario in their day-to-day communications experience, and then ask them questions like, you know, how does it make you feel when you interact with, you know, X component? Or do you have any suggestions on how you would improve, you know, this experience? So different things like that, and actually surveying people to see how their experience is. And then you kind of work from that. You say, okay, these are the top pain points that we're hearing time and time again. And of course, you want to be documenting all of this. So whether this was done by a survey or you actually met one-on-one with individuals, but just making sure that you're, you know, kind of taking out your Excel sheet and just documenting, you met with this person this day, this was their experience, kind of thing. But then from there, that's how you get the requirements, because you see that, you know, maybe people are receiving too many communications, or they're having a hard time finding their communications. Then you start to build the requirements based off of those unmet needs.
I love it. User personas. I love that. Okay. All right. Ready for the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Walk us through this.
I know, yeah, this is a lot, but basically when you're doing user acceptance testing, there are different phases and key activities that need to happen in order for you to kind of close out on all of the user acceptance testing. So just going to go through this on a high level. Of course, you know, you'll get these slides afterwards. But first, it's the initiation. And so you're really going to get together with your testing group. So the people who are helping you plan out the testing. So you might actually work with your development team just to understand what did they develop, and then, you know, kind of understanding the technical aspect of it just a little bit, so you can understand how to go in and test it. And so then once you have that information, you'll figure out, how do you want to approach your testing? What are the key components that you want to test for, to make sure that you can actually close out on what you've built and the testing for it. And we'll go through all this together, but there are different environments that you need to test in before it actually goes live. So there's like a staging environment, which is where you'll most likely test, which is right before you go live. It's basically a safe area where, you know, you can go in, you can test without it going to your actual broad audience, without it being live. Then you want to go into your user acceptance testing design. And this is where you work on a template. So I'll actually show you the template. I'll walk through it after this. But there's a template that you can use, and you need to start thinking about what are the various scenarios that you're going to be testing for, what are the steps that you need to test, and then making sure that you kind of like clearly identified what each of those key areas that you're going to be testing for. So the key features, the key pillars. And then the execution of the testing. So you'll get other testers together. So you likely won't be testing alone, and you'll make sure that they understand how you've designed the tests that they need to walk through, and how they need to perform it, and when they can kind of mark each test as done. And then if there are any issues they find, then there's a way that they can log those issues as well. And then lastly is just closure of the testing. So there's going to be several teams that probably ask for validation. So it can be the development team needs validation. There's going to be at the managerial level, people who need to confirm that you've done this testing, and that it gets the thumbs up. And then there might even be times where leadership wants to check in on this testing as well. That usually doesn't happen as much. They usually just want to know, you know, is this thing ready to launch or not? Go, no go. But yeah, so all of this, you need to kind of have a closure report. And so you'll get like all the key stakeholders together, and you'll lay out the testing template that you filled in with all of the results. And you'll send that along with the summary of all the testing you've done, and any defects you found, and if you think the product or system is ready to launch.
Tiara, I love this because I feel like the whole process elevates and positions internal communicators favorably when they have a formal process of, hey, we know how to test. And I had a question, I believe, Gina, did Zane show up? I know we have one person from our collective who, when they found out you were talking about this, had a question. Is he live?
I'm not seeing Zane. Did you want me to ask his question now?
Go ahead and ask that, because I think it's appropriate here at this slide to ask that.
Okay, no problem. Let me pull it up. So Zane had asked us earlier, he's very interested and would love to hear your feedback on how to set accurate expectations prior to beginning testing. So basically, how would you prepare a leadership or executive team for what to expect for a soon to be launched pilot?
Sure. So as I was mentioning, UAT is usually very granular, which, you know, is something that doesn't typically get bubbled up to the leadership level. So when we're thinking about UAT, this is mostly with the people who are doing the execution work on making sure that the product or the system is working. And then once it reaches the leadership level, they're really focused on, you know, is it working? Is it ready to go? When can we expect this to be launched? And of course, you know, what is the actual scope of what's going to be launched? So what we usually do is that we prep our leaders from the very beginning. Like, this is the big idea that we're thinking of, you know, kind of get their blessing, so to speak, making sure that they're, you know, on board with the general direction of the project. And then from there, we keep them involved and informed along the way in terms of having a roadmap. So, you know, from like this month to this month, we're going to be doing planning. This month to this month, development, and this month to this month, we're planning to, or just the date we're going to launch. So we kind of have a roadmap in place in terms of just high level. This is the major activities we're going to be doing. This is when you can expect this product to be created. So that's how we keep leaders involved. We don't usually show them the actual testing that we've done. They just expect it to be ready once it's launched.
All right. Well, thank you, Tiara. And before we move on, we actually do have another question from our chat. It's from Natalie Guzman, and she says, most IC pros are in IC, not IT, for a reason. And Tiara, Tiara, do you have recommendations on how communicators can learn some tech talk basics to help with their comfort level, in addition to UAT, which is helpful?
Yes. So I came in not knowing anything about, you know, anything technical really. So that's why I always take my initiative to ask a lot of questions, and I have to the technical teams. So I ask a lot of questions in terms of like, even just for testing. I reached out and I asked for, you know, the templates, because these are general templates I'm going to show you that are just used across our company. So I asked for these templates and, you know, asked for direction on how to better document. Whenever someone from a development team kind of works with me, there's always this kind of weird tension in terms of, you know, they're really tech heavy, I'm really business heavy. And so a lot of times the language doesn't connect. And I will literally stop a conversation and I'll say, wait, what does that mean? Because they know that I'm on the business side. I know they're on the tech side. So we understand that, you know, there are going to be differences. And so just don't be afraid to stop a lot of times to ask questions, because it's going to make the process easier later on. I know for VMware specifically, we have a website, like an internal website, where people can add dictionary terms as well that we use internally. So, you know, all those random acronyms. If I ever hear something I don't know, I first start there and I just type something in, and then I get the output, I'll get the definition. But if you don't have that, Google has also been a great kind of dictionary. For instance, for user personas, I didn't know any of that coming in. So I did extensive research just Googling it to kind of figure out what are these different steps to kind of start to build out those requirements, because there's like a lot of things that I don't know. But asking questions, researching, that's a great way to kind of build up your knowledge and the language.
I know one of our sponsor, Circle, I think put a resource guide together of some tech terms.
Oh yeah, I saw that. It was actually really good.
We'll put that in our follow-up too, so you go in not blind of knowing what's API and, you know, things like that, so you can know typically what the tech terms are. All right, Well, I love that. Gina, we got any questions, or can we move on to the other screen? We good?
We can move on. I will say we're at we have 5 minutes-ish left. So if you do have any questions, now is the best time to put them in.
All right, Tiara, take us through this.
Sure. I can actually take you through this live really quick. I already partially filled out the template that I was going to show.
You want me to stop sharing and give you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can definitely go ahead and share.
Okay.
And then this can just be a brief introduction to the idea of what this template looks like. And of course, definitely have time to go through later. But this is essentially, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks
Perfect.
great.
This is essentially the template that we use for user acceptance testing. So it starts with an overview that they were just showing. So it has a project description, what are you working on, purpose of the testing, test information such as the timeline, who else is going to be testing with you, instructions, which you have down here, the test cases, so what you're actually going to be testing, defect log for any errors that you find, and then point of contact, so who's kind of running the testing. So in this case, it would be me. And then update results, so just a place where you're going to be collaborating on these results later on. And then a link to the staging environment that I was talking about. So this is the environment that you can it's like basically a copy of what would be live, but you can kind of just mess around with it, knowing that it's not going to affect anything on a live environment. So then we have instructions, which, pretty straightforward. And then the test cases. So I quickly filled this out, and essentially a test case is something that's more on the technical side. So they're going to have these kind of test cases that look like nothing to us, but in their logs, they have a bunch of different features that they're working on building out. So you just want to kind of map to that. A description of what test you're going to be running. So in this case, I did paper towels, test the absorbency of a single sheet of paper towels, test steps. So tear a piece of paper towel off from the roll, put 5 tablespoons of water in a plastic measuring cup, place a paper towel square on top of the water, and then wait 1 minute and then measure remaining water. So this is of course a simple example, but just to get you used to the idea of how this kind of flows together. Then there's an expected result, so all water should be absorbed after 1 minute. So these things should usually already be in place prior to sending this off to whoever's going to test it. Everything after that, so column E over, is what the tester is going to enter. So you can have a tester's name here. And then if they had if they confirmed any of the existing data, then they can share that here. So in my case, when we first ran this test, there was 1 tablespoon of water remaining before we made any enhancements to the paper towel, for instance. And then actual results, so this is what the tester would put in, the date that they tested, any comments, and then their name. So that's kind of how it works, and then you run all of these tests. And if anything doesn't, so if the actual results don't meet the expected results, then that's a defect, and we put that in the defect log. Just more information as well, just trying to get the background on the technology that they used, and then mapping it back to the actual test case, and then documenting all of those defects here. So I know that's a lot, and I want to just quickly breeze over it, but that's kind of just how it works. And we'll send this out so you can kind of just walk through it, but it's really just documenting what you expect to see with whatever you built out, and then what were those results. That's really what it is. So if you think about a science lab that we used to do back in school, you always had the hypothesis, and then what were the actual results. It's really just that kind of process for every feature of whatever you built out that you want to test.
I love that.
And then afterwards, I was going to say afterwards, then you send the results back to your stakeholders and with a summary of the results. And then you'll follow up, and if there needs to be any additional testing, then you'll retest until everything's fixed and ready for launch.
Awesome. And we're going to be able to give a copy of this, right, to our...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So just so I make sure I get this, I know we're coming up on our time. So if I'm doing like testing an intranet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would put in here, okay, the intranet, it is supposed to have, I'm making this up, a personalized bar on the side when I log in. And so I'm testing all of these things and wanting my fellow communicators on my team to test for them as well. And that would be kind of a product example of how that would work.
Exactly. And like maybe one thing about that is it at the right spot? Is it actually personalized and relevant? Maybe something about the look and design of it, things like that. So you're going to test out all those various aspects.
Okay, perfect. All right, I love it.
Yeah, I know we're at time, but yeah, I'm happy to also take any questions afterwards too if people just want to follow up.
Okay. Well, and we'll go back to sharing our screen, Tiara, if you
Let
want
me
to
stop sharing.
I have one more slide that I don't want to forget because it's all about your episode. And if people want to get more of a sense of not only testing, but how you innovate at VMware, such a global, amazing leader. Both you and Anthea give so many practical, amazing tips. And I know we've also got our free resource guide. We talk about that learning lab of how, to become a scientist and be able to screw up and mess up and experiment and test and have the freedom to do it. But also, I think what I love about the episode, and when you and Anthea talked about the process of that, because it does enhance the credibility and kind of the leadership role that you play there at VMware. So any other ending thoughts that you have for our audience today, Tiara, before we wrap up?
I mean, I think you said it really well in terms of, this can be very daunting starting out, and I know that myself. But once you start and you do this testing once, then you start to really see the benefits and get comfortable with this model of work. And really, the importance of this is that this is how you make sure things work before you get it out to your broad audience. So I find a lot of importance in user acceptance testing, and hopefully this is helpful.
And you're okay if people connect with you on LinkedIn, if they've got a follow-up, if they're getting ready to launch something, especially a technical kind of product, would it be okay if they reached out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
All right, we'll include that in the follow-up. All right, Gina, end us on a high note here.
All right. Well, thank you again, Tiara, for joining us. It was lovely getting to talk with you. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. We hope you had a great time. If you did, our next show is going to be happening not next Monday, but the Monday after on September 28th. It's going to be at 1 p.m. EST once again. This time, our guest is going to be Pierre Lelianic from Google. And as it shows at the top for our opening act, as you saw, you can do just about anything here. I played a song on guitar that was from Sesame Street. So if you have a talent and you'd really love to share it, we would love to see it. We'll be explaining how in our follow-up email. But thank you guys again so much for stopping by, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thanks, Tiara.
Bye.